Okay, so picture this. It's the dawn of the 4th century, and the Roman Empire decides it's going to launch one final all-out assault on Christianity. We're talking about a decade of terror designed to literally wipe the faith off the map. But it didn't work. In fact, it did the complete opposite, setting the stage for one of the most incredible turnarounds in all of history. This is the story of the Great Persecution. So listen to these words from a Christian martyr named Thaliga, spoken right as she was facing her executioners. Her defiance, right there, it just gets to the very heart of this whole conflict. It's a clash between the absolute power of the Roman state and the unshakable faith of this growing religion. I mean, the stakes just could not have been higher. But a storm like this doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. Actually, for decades before this, the church had been living in a period of relative peace. So what changed? Well, it all starts with one of Rome's most brilliant emperors, a guy named Diocletian, and his really ambitious plan to save the empire from itself. You see, Diocletian was sick and tired of the endless cycle of civil wars over who gets to be emperor. So he came up with this system called the Tetrarchy. The big idea was to split the massive job of ruling the empire between 4 guys, which would hopefully create a clear, peaceful line of succession. It was a pretty radical political experiment, for sure. And here's the basic breakdown. You had 2 senior emperors. They were called the Augusti. That's Diocletian in the east and Maximian in the west. Then, each of them picked a junior emperor, a Caesar, who was basically their successor in training. For Diocletian, that was Galerius, and for Maximian, it was Constantius Chlorus. On paper, it looked like a genius plan for stability. And you know what? For a little while, it actually worked. The empire was peaceful, it was prosperous, and you can see just how much Christianity had become part of the fabric of Roman life. I mean, even Diocletian's own wife and daughter were Christians. But there was one huge red flag, and his name was Galerius. He deeply, deeply hated and distrusted the Christians, and that distrust was about to light a match. So the first crack in this fragile peace, it shows up in the army. Some Christians were refusing military service, saying it went against their faith. But Galerius, he didn't see faith, he saw insubordination, a direct threat to the discipline of his legions. And he managed to convince Diocletian to issue an edict kicking all Christians out of the military. This was the very first step down a very, very dark road. And right then, the storm finally breaks. What started as just a purge in the military quickly explodes into an empire-wide war on an entire religion. This was it, the beginning of the Great Persecution. Just look at how fast things fell apart. In 303, the first edict goes after property and jobs. But then, 2 mysterious fires break out in the imperial palace. Galerius immediately blames the Christians. Diocletian, totally enraged, just unleashes this wave of decrees. First, everyone in his own court has to sacrifice to the gods. Then, boom, all church leaders are to be arrested. And finally, in 304, the final, brutal ultimatum for every single Christian in the empire: sacrifice or die. And the human cost, wow, it was just immense. Facing these unimaginable tortures, a lot of people caved. They abandoned their faith. But so many others refused, and they became martyrs. This whole period created these deep, painful divisions inside the church itself, between those who held strong and those who broke. And that was a wound that would take generations to heal. And then you get the ultimate irony. In 305, Diocletian, the guy who built this whole system for stability, he just up and quits. And his perfectly designed tetrarchy, it immediately collapses into the one thing it was built to prevent: a massive, ugly civil war, with a bunch of different guys all fighting for the throne. This chaos basically meant that if you were a Christian, your life depended entirely on your zip code. Over in the east, under Galerius and his guy Maximinus Daia, the persecution got even worse. But in the west, the rival emperors, Constantine and Maxentius, they kind of just ignored the whole thing. They saw it as a political game being played by their enemy, Galerius. So the empire is in total chaos. The church is under attack. It really looks like there's no way out. And then, help comes from the single most unbelievable person you could possibly imagine. Seriously, the situation looked completely hopeless. The empire was tearing itself apart. So you've got to wonder, right? Who could possibly turn this tide? Where could help even come from? Get this. It was Galerius. Galerius himself, the guy who started the whole thing. In 311, literally from his deathbed, he issues this jaw-dropping edict of toleration. He grants Christians a pardon, lets them rebuild their churches, and even asks them to pray to their God for him and for the empire. It was an absolute bombshell. Nobody saw it coming. So what happened? What made him completely flip the script? Well, Galerius was struck down by this horrific, incredibly painful disease. So whether it was a real change of heart or maybe just a desperate last-ditch hope that the Christian God might save him, who knows? But he reversed his life's work. And 5 days after he issued that edict, he was dead. Now, Galerius's death ended the worst of the persecution, but the civil war was still raging. The final chapter of this whole drama wasn't going to be about survival anymore. It was going to be about victory. And it all centered on one young general out in the west, Constantine. With his biggest rival in the east now gone, Constantine saw his chance and he took it. He gathered his legions, marched them over the Alps, and headed straight for Rome to finally settle the score with Maxentius and claim the Western Empire for himself. And here, on the night before the huge, decisive battle right outside the walls of Rome, this is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. According to the people writing about it at the time, Constantine had a vision that would completely change the course of Western history. So the story goes, he looks up and sees a symbol in the sky, the Chi-Rho, which is made from the first 2 Greek letters of Christ, and with it were the words, "In this conquer." Constantine immediately ordered this Christian symbol to be painted on all of his soldiers' shields. The very next day, he won a massive, crushing victory. Maxentius drowned in the river, and just like that, Constantine was the undisputed master of the West. And all of that brings us to this pivotal year, 313 CE. This is the date that officially marks the end of the persecution and the beginning of a totally new era for Christianity. The next crucial step happens in the city of Milan. Constantine meets up with the emperor who was left in the east, Licinius, and together they issue what we now call the Edict of Milan. Now, it didn't make Christianity the state religion, not yet, but it did something that was absolutely revolutionary for the time. It declared total religious freedom for everyone across the entire Roman Empire, and ordered that all the church property that had been seized be given right back. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. The followers of a carpenter from Galilee, people who just a few years before were being hunted, tortured, and killed by the Roman government, were now not only legal, but they were actually being favored by the most powerful man in the world. It was a victory beyond anything they could have possibly imagined. But that incredible victory brings up a new, really deep and difficult question. For 300 years, Christianity had defined itself as being separate from the power of the world. Now, all of a sudden, it was wrapped up in it. So what happens when a faith that was built on humility and service suddenly finds itself holding the sword of imperial authority? Well, that's a question that the church and the world would be wrestling with for the next 1,000 years.